Welcome to the first episode in a Legendarium series about the Carthaginians. In Part 1, A New Empire, we will talk about the city's legendary founding by Queen Dido. The first Carthaginian settlers brought their religion from Phoenicia, but they created whole new institutions of government along with a vast fleet that allowed them to dominate the western Mediterranean. According to tradition, Queen Dido founded Carthage in the year 814 BC. A royal from the Phoenician city of Tyre, she fled her homeland with a band of faithful followers. Dido's father, King Belus, wished to divide the realm between her brother Pygmalion and Dido's husband Sychaeus. After Belus died, Pygmalion tried to thwart his father's wishes by murdering his brother-in-law Sychaeus. While Pygmalion would have murdered his sister as well, the spirit of Sychaeus warned Dido in a dream that her brother would murder her to control the whole kingdom. Sychaeus then guided Dido to his hidden treasure, which she used to finance her escape. Dido and her followers sailed across the Mediterranean until they eventually arrived in North Africa, off the coast of modern-day Tunisia. She haggled with local chiefs for land, bargaining for a plot of earth that could be covered with an ox hide, seemingly no great trade and one that Dido could get on the cheap. Then Dido cut the hide into the thinnest possible strips and used them to encircle enough land to create a city. The wealth of Dido's city became so great that African kings asked for her hand in marriage. However, she always refused them as she continued to love her murdered husband. Later, the Roman writer Virgil expanded Dido's story in his masterwork, the Aeneid. In this epic poem, the Trojan hero Aeneas fled Troy after its destruction by the Greeks. Like Odysseus, Aeneas traveled to many places before he found a new homeland for his followers in Italy. One of the locations Aeneas visited was Dido's new city of Carthage. Dido fell in love with Aeneas and tried to convince him to stay. While Aeneas longed to stay with the Tyrian queen, his duty compelled him to leave Africa. Heartbroken, Queen Dido committed suicide by building her funeral pyre, standing upon it, and setting it alight. In time, Aeneas and his followers founded the city of Rome. Virgil used this story to help explain the long-standing hatred between Rome and Carthage. Whether or not there is any truth to the tragic legend of Queen Dido, the Tyrian settlers did bring their religious practices and beliefs to their new homeland in Africa. The two most important gods worshipped in Carthage were Baal-Hamon and Tanit, who formed the divine couple of the Carthaginian pantheon. The name Baal-Hamon likely meant Lord of the Brazier or Lord of the Incense Altar. It is almost certain that Baal-Hamon was a version of the Phoenician sky god Baal, who continued to be worshipped in Canaan for centuries. But while the Carthaginians worshipped Baal-Hamon as the king of all gods, in Canaan, Baal continued to be worshipped as the simple bringer of rain. Tanit served as the consort of Baal-Hamon, likely the equivalent of the Canaanite goddess Asharte. Her worship only began centuries after the supposed migration of the Phoenicians to Africa. Nonetheless, she soon exceeded Baal-Hamon in the Carthaginian pantheon. Worshipped as a celestial goddess, the Carthaginians believed that Tanit served as a mother goddess who controlled fertility as well. Alone among the Carthaginian pantheon, Tanit was represented by a symbol, a triangle with a horizontal line and a circle above it. Most likely, this symbol represented a stylized female figure with outstretched arms. However, one deity in the Carthaginian pantheon served as a link between Africa and Phoenicia. Melqart served as the chief deity and protector of Tyre, the supposed homeland of Queen Dido. For the first few centuries of Carthage's existence, it sent 1/10 of its annual profit to the temple of Melqart in Tyre as tribute. In addition, Tyrians and Carthaginians came together each year to celebrate the resurrection of Melqart in a festival called the Agarus. Other Phoenician gods brought from Tyre to Carthage included Esmon, the god of healing, Resheph, the god of fire and lightning, and Rosop, the god of war. For centuries, the Carthaginians kept up the priesthoods and cults of the mother city. Temple priests and their acolytes performed different rituals and charged a fee for each service. Not surprisingly, since people at the time suspected the Phoenicians of performing child sacrifices, they thought the same about the Carthaginians. Indeed, the Old Testament described a Canaanite god named Moloch who demanded child sacrifice, though this is a point of contention among biblical scholars. While the Carthaginians devoted large cemeteries to the burial of children and did bury them with sacred incense and religious symbols, we do not know for certain if the Carthaginians ritually slaughtered children. But if they did, it is worth remembering that the Carthaginians believed that a sacrifice would appease wrathful gods and ward off disaster. The religious subservience to Tyre reflects Carthage's relative lack of importance during the early centuries. It served mainly as a stop for Phoenician traders to resupply or repair their ships. By the 500s BC, Carthage developed an oligarchy headed by two magistrates called suffetes, who led a council of 104. While this assembly had the right to judge and scrutinize the military, they never chose army commanders from among their own ranks. Instead, they selected military leaders and then gave them a free hand to lead their armies in the field as they saw fit. However, the punishment for a commander who failed or grew too ambitious was crucifixion. Sometimes counselors used crucifixion as a threat to control military commanders and use them as leverage against their political enemies in Carthage. Soon enough, Carthage began to rival the great cities of Phoenicia. As with the United States 2,500 years later, people migrated to Carthage because they wanted to do more with their lives. Migrants placed great importance on actually living within the city walls, either because of superstition or because of the prestige that came from living in Carthage. Because of this, Carthage built upwards. To create 6-story apartment buildings, they quarried limestone from Tunis Bay. They carved out lines in the stone and then stuck wooden wedges into the carvings. By wetting the wood, they expanded the wood until the stone cracked and could be worked out with crowbars. Using a pane and panel method, the Carthaginians constructed new buildings tall and fast. To make the apartments look as if they were made from marble, the Carthaginian builders simply covered them with white stucco. But along with beauty, the buildings also provided creature comforts. As with Rome, Carthage created a water supply for the city by constructing ditches and tunnels that fed directly into the apartment buildings. Each domicile had its own cistern which produced water. And even better, they created a series of passageways for tunnels angled so that gravity kept water running. In this way, they cleared out human waste from the apartments. With their consular form of government and growing military might, Carthage's influence grew to the point where it could expand into western Sicily. For centuries, the Carthaginians struggled with the Greeks for control of the island. Indeed, Sicily ranked among the great prizes of the ancient world, with its fertile farmland, many olive groves, and most importantly, a strategic location in the middle of the Mediterranean. The power that controlled Sicily could control trade between Europe, Africa, and Asia. The struggle for Sicily did much to define Carthage. Like the mother country, Carthage's might rested far more on naval power than military might. Indeed, Carthage's need for ships grew so great that shipwrights began constructing vessels using mass-produced pieces marked with numbers for ease of assembly. The timber used for ships included oak, fir, and pine. Ships could have 1 to 3 masts, each one with a square sail. Sailors worked the rigging and tackle, put up removable bulwarks in stormy weather, and kept the deck tidy. Merchant ships tended to be small and tubby vessels with tiny crews and were mostly powered by sails. On the other hand, shipwrights made warships long and sleek, manned by as many as 170 rowers. While popular culture portrays rowers as galley slaves chained to oars, most rowers were soldiers who served double duty, fighting on land with sword and shield, but then at sea they used an oar. A ship commander controlled direction with 2 steering oars fixed to the stern. Each oar included a horizontal bar for the helmsman to handle. Rowers endured hot, hellish hard work, rowing up to 17 hours a day, keeping time with drums and flutes. They lived on combat rations, a mix of wine and barley bread with olive oil, which they ate on their wooden benches. Fortunately, rowers did not man the oars for the entire trip, but only when the wind died down. In 540 BC, the Carthaginians allied with the Saravateri and crushed the Phocian Greeks at the Battle of the Sardinian Sea. Just a year later, the Carthaginians also allied with the Etruscans to drive the Phocian Greeks from Corsica, establishing themselves on the island. This gave them access to the rich tin mines found on Corsica and Sardinia. Their alliance with the Etruscans of North Italy continued to prove fruitful. At the Battle of Alila, the Carthaginian navy defeated a Greek counter-invasion of Corsica. Since Rome remained within the Etruscan orbit at this time, some of the Etruscans fighting alongside the Carthaginians may well have been Romans, and by the year 500 BC, the Carthaginians took control of the coast of southern Iberia, which gave them access to the rich silver mines. With access to tin and silver, the Carthaginian Empire would dominate world trade like never before. And that wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.